Right, good evening, everyone. It's January 9th, 2025. This is Lynn Carlton. This is a special meeting of the Board of Finance Fund Balance Borrowing and Debt Service Subcommittee. I'll call the meeting to order as we stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we can move to item 3, which is to hear an update on the WPCA long-term financial plan. Just for the benefit of any members of the public who may be following along, the reason that this committee is reviewing this plan is that when this committee was activated earlier this year, part of what spurred it was our analysis of the town's long-term capital plan and the amount of debt that was going to be required to service that plan. And the Board of Finance decided that we needed to do some additional analysis and specifically understand the funding mechanisms that would be used on projects, town projects versus WPCA projects, since the WPCA is a self-sustaining entity, which is a separate taxing authority. So as part of that, we wanted to review a long-term financial plan for the WPCA. And we have this meeting scheduled, and this is our last opportunity to do this before February. So I know that this plan is very preliminary. So big caveat, it's preliminary. We're not holding anybody to anything. I know that the management team would have preferred that we wait a couple weeks before it was finalized and could go to the commission. They have accommodated us to look at this preliminary draft, and we really appreciate that. So I thought at least we should have our meeting, look at the draft, and it gives us an opportunity to maybe provide any input that could be incorporated into the final version that goes to the commission. But we should expect, I assume, changes before this does come before us at our next meeting, the Board of Finance meeting in February. So with that background, Michelle Brewer is here, the general manager of the WPCF. And are you going to take us through this, or?
I'll start with an introduction, and I'll relay for support. And so I just wanted to bring to the board's understanding is that the basis of this is having a strong capital improvement plan. And that is something that WPCA had been lacking. And so we did have a plan in place, but it was not as holistic as it needed to be. So a significant amount of research has been underway since October. That's really what has delayed us in preparing a more final version of a financial plan. So the internal research, not only by WPCA staff, by our capital projects and operations office, by the engineering department, and by financial as well. There's still gaps when it comes to our capital plan, but we are shoring up those gaps. We're on schedule for the month of February to be able to have a more final capital plan, but knowing that that type of plan does need to be able to flex over time. So just keeping that in mind as well. Also, just to bring out that the data here, preliminary for a few reasons. One of those data gaps is historic consumption rates. So what we have,
What does that mean?
and so that's water consumption.
Water.
Yep, so that's water consumption. It's what we're basing our rate of the water use. So we typically have data for the past 3 years, but we'd like to see data for at least 5 years. So the extra 2 years of data is something that we're currently seeking through Aquarian. So just note when it comes, there's one spreadsheet in here that's feeding this information for calculating the rate increases. It's missing that information right now, but we're actively working to attain that. In our capital plan, there is significant legislation that went into effect in October that affects the way that WPCA manages its sludge. And that could be a significant expenditure for us not only moving forward in fiscal year 26 and beyond, but in this current fiscal year. So we compost our sludge at the facility. We've actually been able to get a very minor revenue off of that material, that composted material, is selling it as a soil amendment locally and to neighboring states. We're no longer able to do that because of the, I'll say contamination, but the characterization of the sludge. So we're very limited in what we can do with that material at this time. So we're no longer going to gain any revenue off of it. It's going to be a significant. We are pricing out alternatives for the management of that sludge, but again, we're not going to have those numbers until mid-February.
Oh boy, and what was behind the state, what, this is state,
Yeah.
and what was behind that? Is it?
It's not clear to us.
No, I never heard anything about that.
Yeah, this is Public Act 24-59. And it regulates perfluoroalkyl substances in commercial products, biosolids generated from publicly owned treatment works, so our WPCF sludge, is included as a commercial product under that Public Act. And there's one sentence in that Public Act that limits its application to the land if it contains any level of that chemical substance, which is ubiquitous. So
Is that something that our state legislation can help with?
So we've reached out to our state reps and say they know that we're actually very unique in Fairfield. We're the only facility, water pollution control facility that composts its biosolids. So really this Public Act has the most significant effect on us. How that got
What
incorporated?
committee did that come out of in the state? Do you know?
Environment Committee.
Environment.
Yeah,
Committee?
and it flip-flop. My understanding is the history of it flip-flop. This was not the original intention to be included in that Public Act. It was removed. It came back in sort of very late in the game, and it was approved with this requirement.
Sounds like unintended consequences.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Not
if that's
fully
the case,
vetted.
yeah, I mean, there's obviously session just started now. It would be good to get, to engage with them on it and understand. I don't think any of our state reps are on the environment.
I think so.
Who's Jen Leeper?
She was representing the black. I think it's
Is
one
that
of
what
those
it's
things.
called, the environment committee?
So,
Okay.
But if they're not, they know who to.
They know who to go to, but yeah, because it's interesting if, they may not, if they're not on the committee, then they may not have had a detailed understanding of the local
She is
impact.
listed as an environment, but what's that? I would assume that's under, our website. The session just started, but I would assume it's correct.
Okay.
The one thing to say there to the point of it kind of being ducked in at the end, right? I mean, is that, if you read it, that at surface and even just reading through all the different lines that are inside of the bill, which we did when we sat down internally and talked about it, you'd say if it was in front of me, there's no way unconscionable not to have voted for what was in front of you at that time because of all these other serious things.
Right.
It's just this one line that your unintended consequences that might have very well at the very last minute got tucked in.
Okay.
But we do intend on bringing it up. It's definitely, it's definitely a problem. And then it adds this variable that we don't have you don't have an answer either way.
And so this was one of the laws that went into effect on January 1st?
it went into effect January 1st. This piece of the act became effective October 1st. And so that act lays out a schedule for different commercial products. And biosolids, that schedule for that particular product was October 1st.
So what's the magnitude revenue perspective in terms of lost?
Or an expense perspective?
Right, so it could be upwards of $1 million per year for sludge management. That's the reality. Yep, and right now we're getting a very minor revenue off of it.
The revenue is
$1,000.
Basically $1 million cost.
Right.
Per year.
Is your worst case scenario. So
It's a
we,
meaningful amount for this.
Yeah.
we're meeting in a couple of weeks, with, We Care. We've given them,
We've given
like out of it.
yeah, we've given our vendor that we work with, for the compost and soil amendment distribution, they've really stepped up in supporting us in working through their network of contacts to determine options. Where we provided them technical data to help them along that path. We have a meeting set up with them beginning of February. So we're actively engaging over the past couple of months on this and to determine a strategy moving forward.
Yeah, no, I'd love to hear what comes of pursuing the, just following up, because again, I'm sure that the bill in its entirety is,
Agree.
does a lot of worthy things, but I'm completely ignorant of this. If there must have been somebody had some reason for inserting that language in, and I just wonder what the rationale was.
The only other state that has similar legislation in place is Maine.
I wonder where they got the wording from. I think you didn't think to put that in it. There's only one other state.
Well,
Are there any other communities in Connecticut impacted? You said we were one of the few, but
And we're the only ones who land apply our biosolids because we have a composting facility and we are the only WPCA that has a composting facility in Connecticut.
and so if I could ask another dumb question, because I know I
Not
have to. It's composting sounds like a good thing.
It is.
So like what are,
It's
yeah,
reduced. Yeah.
and from a contamination perspective, like, which I assume was the impetus for this legislation, the sludge, like what impact does that have on, I mean, is there an environmental hazard?
And the state of Connecticut has not studied this. Some other states have. Michigan has studied land application of biosolids containing this contaminant of concern. New York State has. New York has legislation in place, and Michigan as well, identifies certain thresholds and locations where land application can occur. So for example, it can't be land applied as a residence for public gardening purposes, just examples like that. But it may be able to be applied for like a commercial or industrial site landscaping purpose. Connecticut hasn't done any of that legwork.
Just said zero.
It's
They're all around
And
us.
we haven't, and I've been reaching out to counterparts at the state, with Connecticut DEP. They are not, I think they were also blindsided by this legislation, and they are not prepared to provide any type of technical support or interpretation of what zero means.
Sounds like you should be providing testimony once I ask for an amendment on this bill.
It's a
Yeah.
challenge.
So it started October 1st of this year.
Right.
I mean, I'm sorry, 24 or starting
24.
20.
24 it started. Yeah.
So you've already seen an increase in cost.
So we have been storing our material since then. We had one shipment on October 4th, and that was purely because being naive, the town didn't know. Since that time, we've been storing at Denali We Care, which is the site that takes our composted material. We have limited capacity there. So right now we have capacity up through mid-March. So this is something that we need to figure out very soon.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no, so are you so you'll reach out to Jen, is that?
Yeah, we are intending on doing that.
They are at I know they're in a legislative town
Yes.
hall tonight, so I find her to be extraordinarily responsive and,
And she knows of this.
Yeah.
So she and I talked
oh, you did,
back in
okay.
December
Yeah.
briefly. I've sent her information, resources, educational about this.
Yeah.
And just facts about how this affects Fairview.
Is she aware of the whole capacity?
She is. I just let her know yesterday with additional correspondence.
Okay,
And in the process, we're working to address it, what those costs will be, what our current plan is. Upwards of $1 million are possibly options that, that don't immediately have us $1 million charge, but we're also working on trying to get those in place, obviously with the upcoming budget. And we've got it's one thing in the winter time, but by spring, we're going to have to do something with what's on site. So that's a wild card of.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, even if they're, sometimes legislation like this, sometimes they could even put something on hold or defer something pending further study, and you never know.
We got this.
Yeah,
So we'll see what we hear.
okay, all right. So with that large caveat, we can
It's a big one.
Okay.
So I think I'll defer to you, David, to start the actual.
Is anything in these numbers built in for this?
There isn't, that's why I brought it up right at the front of the discussion.
On back point that you dealt with Sabrina Blue, we worked with her a little bit more.
Yeah, sure.
You walk us, start walking us through it and then I'll kind of work at the end.
Yeah.
Just, yeah.
And some of this, and I would just, before the back, I do want to say, you know, yeah, we have spent, I know that the WPCA component is a big, driver or potential driver of the overall capital. If we took it all out, we'd be way under, you know, or reasonably under the threshold. We put more of it in, we're gonna be way over any of our conservative, percentages, right? So, the top, the approach that's been taken to not only add in, if you backtrack on the timeline from when Michelle started, when the numbers had been layered in, she wasn't involved in those items. So this is really her first crack at being involved. She has gone through, in great detail, all of the reports, and seeked out items that weren't necessarily inside the Red Peers report, but also looked at, what is or isn't, what in that report and what the allocation in last spring we brought forward as priorities. I think you're going to find as we move forward over the next few months in our requests that that some of those things are gonna change. She's put a different sort of stamp on.
You can take a
where
look
we're
at the projects list. Maybe that's where we start
Probably-
the discussion.
Yeah, so
The
what I was
project.
gonna say is that's gonna change some. There are gonna be new things and there's gonna be a reworking of prioritization.
Look at your packet. It starts on the third from last page.
So things are stapled, so it's the last staple done.
The last paper packet.
Yeah.
Two papers.
So this is our new draft capital projects plan. And what we are already authorized for and what we'll be seeking authorization for as we move forward. The schedule is much more reliable than what was in the plan that was reviewed in September of this past year. It's more aligned with not only the recommendations that were made in our 2017 facility plan and the Woodard and Curran condition assessment report, but also from an operation perspective.
Any changes in this document from what we saw previously? Is it highlighted anywhere?
It's not highlighted, and now that you mention it, that would be a good thing for us to
Or do you
do.
have a copy of it? And you're usually carrying that thing around.
Yeah, no, so when we get the full updated capital plan in February, there is a change document within there that literally shows every single change and then totals and a roll forward of the impact. So we will have that. So since this isn't final, I don't know if this is going to be tweaked again, but as this is final and gets rolled into what we see in February, we will have that.
Yeah.
But try to, maybe you could just tell us so.
Yeah.
Maybe do the increase, decrease, like what I.
We added projects. We added projects that had been in the queue over the past 3 to 5 years to be included on the capital plan, but for different reasons didn't make it onto the plan and should have. We also have the items that were identified in the Woodard and Curran condition assessment report that were not on the existing plan and needed to be added to the plan. So you'll see here WPCF roof replacements. That's surprisingly a somewhat significant cost. You'll see that there's, again, the sludge management study, inclusive of the plant equipment improvements. We're phasing them in still, 1, 2, and 3, so highest, mid, and lower priorities. I honestly think, looking at it from an operations perspective, we're going to end up lumping in phase 2 and 3 together. We're actually pursuing those improvements, but phase 1.
That's the 4.
Yeah. And so phase 1, we left the total number the same that we're dedicating to the improvements, to what we've already been authorized for, but we've just dispersed the money differently. So that's a scheduling change. I
Can
think,
I just ask one more question about that?
sure.
So, I thought like the bigger picture, we were trying to figure out based on like how we were getting close to our number and our percentage. We won't be able to see that. So is this just more to take us through the plan at a
It's
high level?
Like the one, yeah,
The one-
so that, we won't see that until we see the whole plan. But the whole plan in February, I understand, has some, at least one big number moving in the positive direction. And one of the school projects, so there's
I
gonna be.
think
a
we
bunch-
had found out, they had said something about,
The
it mentioned it that there was part of the building that was already air conditioned.
Yeah.
Factor in.
So there's two different moving pieces that will significantly drive it down. One we know for sure, $30 million because of the two,
Okay.
two schools primarily, but across because of the high schools driving it down, but it's about $30 million. So that's significant. That was $130 million moving down to 100. And then the other piece within that same project that we are not 100% on, but we are getting word from the delegation that's likely that HVAC is now going to squarely independently count towards reimbursement. That is, I believe, more of a policy than even a legislative vote, and something that is likely to come down hopefully in the next few weeks in the form we can put on that schedule.
So the reimbursement rate
The
is,
reimbursement rate for projects like that, approach would be around 24%.
The state will reimburse.
But you could, yeah, so that would take the numbers down even further by somewhere between 20 and 25 million. So you could be looking at a $50 million reduction on the HVAC from the numbers that were presented previously, which is significant. That's about 1 percentage point, most likely, of a reduction from everything. we saw.
that's basically a full year's expense, but it depends where it was and where it was scheduled out. And so the times, I think part of what we were trying to get to, which we need the whole plan to see, but it's not just the projects and the dollars, but the timing. was gonna be-
Timing, exactly. It's the scheduling, for sure. And this is where, WPC still needs to have some flexibility for the projects that have not yet been authorized. So I'm going to bring you down to the pump stations and the forest mains.
And if I
Yeah.
could, before you get to that, I just want to bring up like another thing that Michelle pointed out, and I'm glad she did, under capital equipment, which is new, at $700,000. It's not a massive number within this, but it's important. But it is a series of basically essentially their entire fleet. No one's been paying attention to their fleet. Talk all day on about fire trucks and police cars, and we talk about DPW and collecting that. They've kind of been living on an island over there where they're all from
Talk about
equipment
trucks,
downward,
yeah.
all the way down to what the vehicles inspectors are driving or anything around. No one's been paying attention to that.
Okay.
So Michelle is starting to and trying to take that head on. That's really.
So what you see here is actually for one heavy duty vehicle. It's our
Yeah.
flusher truck, the 700,000. It's for one
Yeah.
specialized vehicle. We have other vehicles in our fleet that are much less in cost. They're definitely in the 6 digits, but we should be able to assume those costs through our operating budget in future years. But this is the most.
She's working.
Yep, it's our specialty road vehicle. Yep, we're flushing out the
Do we
sewer
even
line.
want to know what this truck does?
It flushes our sewer line.
You'll see it around. town.
Yeah,
It
it provides-
goes in with a hose and just pushes the water through or something?
It does, and then we're also able to remount the pipes. And so for root control purposes, we're able to take out roots and obstructions to the pipes. And then we're also able to provide treatment so that we don't get immediate regrowth. So it's really specialized vehicle.
Yes,
like
it
that,
seems
like-
to, is that I assume it's special order and you take some
That's a
time.
good question. I don't know what the lead time is
Okay.
for that.
All right, so I'm sorry, so
Yeah.
take us back to, okay. You're starting to talk about force mains and pump stations.
And so this is really where the scheduling comes into play. So Fairfield Beach, scheduling remains as is. I mean, that's still the first and foremost priority when it comes to the pump station replacements. we're looking to execute the design phase of that within the coming month. But we're looking down at the other pump stations that haven't yet been authorized with the Forest Main. Center Street and Mill River are the two keys that have changed. Center Street, we're identifying the need for the coming fiscal year to devote at least for design, that pump station out of the three that are top three priorities. So that would be Fairfield Beach Center and Pine Creek. Center Street's really limping along operationally. Center Street had been a little bit lower on the priority list. We thought it could come after Pine Creek. Pine Creek and Fairfield Beach, just the locations of where they are at, climate resiliency was really bringing those up to the forefront. But here we have a pump station that it doesn't have pumps that are capable of handling the flow. The pumps need to be resized. We repaired the guts of those pumps, but those are just really temporary repairs. Yeah, they're way past the end of their end of life. And again, that's limping along. It's not going to last another 2 years. So we may choose, we might choose out of necessity to replace the pumps in total and leave the SCADA, the electrical, everything else in regards to the pump station on hold. But again, we're still working through our consultant Ty & Bond's preliminary investigation evaluation report that we just received in December. They made some recommendations in regard to this. So we're not going to have that answer until like a month.
What did Ty & Bond do and what was the scope of that study that they did?
The scope of the study was to really build off of the pump station evaluation that Wright Pierce performed for us in 2018. And so they looked at current operational performance of each one of our pump stations, identified what is in need of either can it be repaired, what's the immediacy of the repairs, or does it need full replacement. They also evaluated, performed hazardous materials analysis just to determine, like, do we have PCB contamination, lead, asbestos. And they're also evaluating resiliency concerns. That's one of the things that came out is Fairfield Beach and Pine Creek, what needs to be done to ensure that we're meeting current standards when it comes to floodproofing. And also, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, you were talking about the scope of the report. Okay.
Scope of the report. Totally lost my train of thought. Oh, permitting, and I'm thinking permitting, and that's another significant piece of this puzzle. It's what
Did
permitting.
they look at our full, the entire system in terms of all this? When they evaluated that or no?
No, and so it was limited to the pump stations in our force mains, and so the evaluation.
All the pump stations in Fort Smith.
Well, 7 of our 8 pump stations,
Okay.
because one pump station was replaced a few years ago.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so 7 of our 8 pump stations.
Okay.
And helping us determine the priority. If we could
replace
rehab or if it requires a full replacement.
The one that was replaced 70%.
Yep. So Center Street, the schedule has been expedited, but it's likely we may need to expedite more. So it's likely that we may need to seek more money sooner.
And so the bond, I'm looking at the costs for these pump stations. So in year 1, you have $500,000. Is that a study or what is that?
That's primarily design and going out to bid.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
And then you leave yourself 2 years when it gets implemented, and that's, the
Working through the design.
$3 to $4 million-ish. Okay.
Yep. And then Mill River Pump Station Forest Main. So we have, for each one of these, we have the pump station and we have the forest main. How we're receiving our septic. And so the forest main for Mill River, it's exceeding its end of life, it's 40 years old. As part of the Ty & Bond evaluation, it was identified that there's a high potential of 7 points of failure in that force main. It's an environmentally sensitive area, and there's no duplicity in place. So although we have parallel force mains and it was built to have that duplicity, so we have two force mains looking exactly the same. One was put on hold just in case we needed to perform some type of maintenance or repair on the force main that is currently in use. We never maintained the unused main, and so now we can't use it.
Wow.
What happens to it without maintenance?
The structural integrity has deteriorated, and it's become full of obstructions, rooty growth, that we're not going to be able to.
It's unfortunate.
That is really.
So what happens if I picture you up there?
So what we're going to do is the recommendation is we're going to go and repair that force main, the spare. And we need the spare because we can't bypass without it, significant amount of flow. And so we're going to get the spare in good working order, and then we'll have to determine, do we have a need for a spare? One would think yes, because of the volume of flow we have through this particular main. But then if we maintain a spare, we have to make sure we actually maintain it. We don't
Yeah.
keep the spare.
If you're gonna have it here, in this case, you have such a problem. There's no way, even if you like took the move to the spare,
Can't use
You
the
can't-
spare right now. Yeah.
can it be repaired?
So that's the plan. So we'd have to go in and replace the spare. It can't be easily repaired. It has to be replaced just like the,
Like it's almost like a
Activate.
rebuild of it
We're
or
going to
something.
replace the spare to, in order to fix the.
We're gonna
other one? Yeah.
yeah. So this also has to, the scheduling for this has been changed to expedite.
Which line is that?
That's Mill River.
That's that five-
Yeah,
First 500 and then it goes to 39?
right. Yep.
And that's why that was more expensive.
That
because
far
there were
out?
two pieces in it.
So the commission, in November, the commission approved moving forward with an expenditure out of fund balance of $200,000, which is the design. Okay, that's the estimate that we received from Ty and Bond for the design of the force main.
Having that in 28 and 29 seems a little far out.
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm saying, like, we expedited this, what you're seeing here, but it's likely we should probably move it forward.
I would expect it to be like 26,
Yeah.
27. but 27
We
seems.
have a lot on the,
Right,
we have a lot on our schedule, and to me, it all brings high priority at this point,
Yeah.
just because we have deferred maintenance for such a significant period of time, and you're deferring maintenance for these types of, for our collection system, for conveyance systems, for unit operations at our facility for a decade. We've run into this unfortunate situation that we're in now, where everything appears to have equal priority. And we know that we can't actually, realistically, we can't work that way. We can't be doing all this work.
I mean,
all
it's not even
simultaneously.
the financial issues, probably just to be able to.
Project
execute. Yeah.
management, resources,
Just back to our
bringing
conversation
consultants
two
and
nights ago, project
other
management.
contractors.
But I would think you can have a real serious fiasco on right now. What, just jumping ahead for 1 second, 26 is by far the lightest here, like 7. Is there any reason why that's so low? Is it just the same issue we talked about with getting project managers, resources?
Got the first phase.
Because it seems very,
It's been
it
slow.
would almost seem like with some of the magnitude of the issues. I don't know what was going on the other night. The smell of god awful.
So the digester, that was the digester.
And is that on the fix of this thing
It's
or,
done now.
and it smelled like that?
So,
Oh, it always has an odor down there. Some of it's the plant, some of it's the leak care
So-
location. You
so-
think it's one thing, but it's actually another.
yeah,
Whatever it was, there's a problem.
just recently, or you're
No.
talking about a couple
No,
years
no,
ago?
that's-
About 2 nights ago.
But that's the normal.
That's just.
This was
dumb.
far worse than the normal.
2 nights ago at the BOF, sometimes.
It's when I walked out, but it wasn't like the digester smell. The digester smell, I could smell a mile away at my house when that's.
It was the normal smell, sometimes on particularly cold.
I was wondering if it had to do with the cold, just make it heavy,
There's some,
lingering.
yeah, there's some evenings down there, as someone who's spent a lot on the our training facility, it's like we just used to it now. It could be particularly, but it wasn't the Gesture smell. It could have been, yeah.
And we did, we
You were right, it was strong, but you checked the full evening.
And we did issue a notification on Monday to the local community around the plant. We're finishing up the digester project this week, and so we're transferring solids out of a holding tank in order to put our tank back into use, the digester itself. So that's why we did send out the notification that there may be some odor from that, but it's, yeah.
But so to Amy's point though, and I'm gonna,
So that project's not on this plan because it is at the point of completion.
no, but I just want to keep on,
Rotten bottom.
just to keep on track. And just to Amy's point, I think part of it too is that
My
this
office is
project,
there, so
the
I-
year one cost of them is the design work, which tends to be smaller. And so I think that's,
Well, I see that, but why wouldn't we move the design work to 25?
well, no, because it's the fiscal, so the fiscal 25-26 bond is what we're going to be bonding this year.
So that's
When you say fiscal 26, it's 25-26, right? So that means this year. That's the current.
Yeah.
year. Yeah, so this is the current one. So if we were to, let's just say that these projects come before the Board of Finance over the next 2 months, and we approve them, they would be bonded in fiscal year 25-26. So they'd hit the, so let's say they'd be bonded July 1, and you'd have half the debt service in the 25-26 year.
You pay half of,
Yeah.
pay half of that.
Yeah, exactly, half the debt service. Okay. Go ahead, Michelle. Sorry.
No, that's great. And then just one other item, and I know it did hit the capital plan in September, was the structural and MEP plant evaluation. So that's something that the board and current condition assessment report identified at a very, very high level, didn't perform any type of evaluation associated with it. My understanding is it was really just based on observations by that firm, but this is on here because this is going to assist us in determining our priorities at the plant. My priorities for plant upgrades might have a need to flex depending on the results of this evaluation. Right now, it's in fiscal year 27, but again, I mean, realistically, like where would we like to see it when we're talking about priorities and where does it really need to be and how much can we take on at once? I mean, I would like to see it in 26, but can we actually take that on in addition to everything else that we're taking on in 26 with the resources we have internally? So that's why you'll see some of these things. We'd like to get them into 26, but looking at our internal resources, it might not be able to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those are, I think, those are the significant highlights for the biggest changes from what you've seen in September to what you see on this draft plan now.
Before I forget, you probably attention with the fund balance transfer the commission approved.
Yeah.
I think we're supposed to approve that too.
And
We haven't,
go through all the boards,
Yeah.
right? Like I've been on my schedule to go to the Board of Selectmen next. They,
think so. I think it's a Board of Finance because it's,
So,
but we don't, I don't want to get,
So
can you
just-
just take a note to yourself? Because we, in the past, those transfers have come to us, so I just want to make sure.
so our,
We could do that in February when we look at the plan if need
Okay.
be.
this came up earlier, I can't remember where we landed, so I'll look into it and make sure we.
I am certain that I remember having to approve fund balance transfers for the WPCA in the past. We have done it, and so I assume there's a reason.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
what
know
I'm
where-
gonna double check,
It might just fall into the normal, kind of like a,
because it's interdepartmental, that was a question I think.
I don't know, but
But we know that.
yeah, I'm still learning each level of review and
Yeah.
approval, and so my assumption was.
We got a firm answer on the,
But-
what has to be and why.
If you have. So normally, if you have an appropriation or if you have an amount in the budget and you're just transferring it from one place to another, it only requires Board of Finance. If you're increasing an overall appropriation for some reason, it has to go through all the boards. They're actually changing the budget that was in that.
Yeah, and so I think, I mean, this
Yeah.
wasn't identified as an
Which I think
appropriation.
is actually
for
the
fiscal year
reasoning. your
That
point.
might have to go through all three, so, and I don't remember, it. I think you can look at the past ones and see if they've
Yeah,
gone through.
we did one not to
And so it's this project plan that is feeding the debt waterfall. And the debt waterfall is,
Oh, yeah, same last packet,
Yeah,
but it's,
the
it's
last
the
page.
page 3, so it's labeled 101. So that's the actual waterfall that's utilizing, that, Sprundle Senior Supervisors calculation, so we run a separate calculation for anything that's gonna be treated as self-supporting. And,
This is for purposes of making sure it can be self-supporting. So once you put this in this debt service into the financial plan,
yes.
that the costs to service this debt can be covered by the projected rate increases.
Correct.
yep, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that this, and we'll get to where it lands shortly, but I think doing the financial plan exercise, it is, it has been questions. Yep, it's market self-supporting and clearly the ratings is so far taken some face value at that, but long term, was it really going to be self-supporting? We've now done a whole financial plan to prove out, whether it can based upon, a series of
Or how it
projections.
Okay.
How it would actually be to it, at the levels that are on here.
Right, and then also for, as a reminder, and I say for the public, I don't know if anyone's watching this, but so to the extent it is self-supporting and this debt service is ultimately absorbed in the financial plan, we wouldn't include that debt in the town waterfall as when we measured this, we only want to go up to 9% of debt service.
Right.
Take it out, like it's being funded separately, and that drives the capacity for what we can do on the town board side.
So I have a sausage question, it's probably directed at you, David, but on this waterfall chart, I'm just looking at the top line out of curiosity. The first year debt service is 966K. And to the right of that, it says Munis 857. Is that just because there's a manual spreadsheet that's not tying back to the systems?
So I'm gonna go to an answer. Sabrina built it and I don't have the answer, but I can tell you.
Let's define a friend.
It's not available tonight,
That's fine.
but I would tell you, this related to those numbers and what ultimately landed in the budget, and they don't match. So that is something that we're working through within this year's. So there were projections, but then there were actual funded,
So you're saying the Munis number is the budget number?
I'd have to pull their actual budget out. That is another.
I mean, you can get back to us. I think,
Yeah.
because I remember that when we did the budget, right? We had Frank put together the budget for debt service. It was, I don't want to call it back of the envelope, not a calculation.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it was driven off a full
Well,
waterfall, so.
And let me say another thing that we found in a couple of areas recently that we are working through is the physical budget book. And the actual units, there are some lines that are now, that are not necessarily matching. And we're working to clean those up. So I don't have an answer, but the budget director's not. But that's usually
Are they-
at that level.
Hopefully they're
It's-
minor.
It's minor things. It really, it is some it's minor. We're picking up on things like Michelle during the budget meeting yesterday, and it's like, I don't understand, not the other Michelle, and it's like, I'm going, wait a minute, it's one little line and it's not massive. It's a couple $1,000 either way, but it never got cleaned up after the budget was approved, is where for that to be the exact amount. So there might have been an early departmental entry and then what you set it up for within units. But yet the total amount in the department, it matches on the sheet. So I've asked her to go through, and work,
Yeah, no, it's good, since we have our new CFO here.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good control to fit. I mean, somebody should make sure that there's a process to reconcile units to the approved
Right.
budget.
Yeah.
By department and like, whatever.
And I also see the other check in your bottom left of this page where it shows that they're within $2 or like Spurgill's spreadsheet, so that's good to check.
Yeah.
So that's good.
We'll take the $2.
Yeah, we'll take $50.
It's a matter of 2 million there or 2 million.
Million there,
Right.
Okay.
And just one side note to this. So when Sabrina put this together, she was just being most conservative, and assuming worst case scenario. And so her assumption was that WPCA was assuming cost on all the projects here, including the $13.5 million. Which I found was funding for the East Trunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's inclusive.
Okay.
Oh,
That's
so
good
this
point.
would be, this is overstated for East Trunk,
Right.
because that was already,
Million.
okay, so that needs to come on.
Yeah.
That should be, because that, to me, that's not conservative, that's like a,
Okay.
'cause that was already approved, so that should be, needs to exclude that.
What
For,
year is that in, or is that the whole way?
it's gonna be the whole way, because we just approved that, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have that embedded in the?
On the very first
members
line of
of the
the
whole.
capital project, there's the East
So
Trunk
we
line.
include it in
Total
the-
spread.
Okay.
It's about 18 million in total. But
And so when we approved that debt service, we assigned it 50/50 to the town and the WPCA, on the basis that it was not just, it was a capacity increase that was supporting new development,
Yeah,
which the new development supported the entire grand list. So the decision was supporting new development and existing sewer users. And so it was split between the two.
The East Trunk line is near.
Metrics, that's the
Yeah,
metric.
the Metro Center, which is just a, it's a huge commercial development, zone for us. Compared to just, some of the small.
Yeah, and part of the project was, I think, taking a 30-inch pipe to a 36-inch pipe.
Taking it out of the wetlands.
Yeah.
moving it.
And so it was not, it was moving.
You're getting too deep for now.
Yeah.
and then we need.
But yeah, so supporting additional capacity, so that's the reason, because that was sort of a big decision and not. And part of what this committee was supposed to be doing was making recommendations to how do we shouldn't be doing that willy-nilly or project by project, but we have a policy around where debt is carried and why, so, okay. Okay, so if that's, so the what, so
And
this,
I think, so this is feeding into the financial plan, which is on the first page of this packet.
Revenues?
I mean, not the first page, the, for. On my packet.
Estimated debt service coverage.
Fourth there.
So the first thing that jumps out at me for the debt service coverage requirement page is the top line, which assumes a 10% growth rate year over year. Is that interesting?
It's not, the average increase historically was 42%.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
where should I be?
So the title is estimated debt service coverage requirement.
Of this schedule?
Yep.
Oh, God.
And the top line user fees assumes
So
10%.
that was all the bad news. The good news on this side is we talked about not spiking the rate and other things to cover a lot of these things.
Yeah.
And, and in this process, we've also talked a lot about layering on even more of these projects that Michelle has come up with and prioritization. The other side of it is when you start to walk through our projections, there's a lot that we've simply been taking the existing number in our formulas and just running it up by a couple points a year and
Yeah.
sampling what that would do. If you look at the actual growth beyond doing fee increases, the actual growth in user
Consumption.
from a consumption.
Assumption.
And you marry those together, we actually have a significant revenue bonus that we're going to.
So the 10% growth assumption isn't rate driven, it's partially rate driven, but not completely, it's consumption driven.
But the consumption piece being.
Now,
That's helpful.
Suggestion, since we're working on a draft here, if I can make a suggestion for this analysis, for user fees, it would be helpful, and I think for the commission and definitely for the Board of Finance, if we broke out the user fee increase between rate and
And consumption.
yeah, because the consumption, and then we can show that the underlying assumption under assumption and consumption, I sound like production.
What's your point? Hand button on.
People from my generation. understand.
I know, okay.
But,
My speaker
yeah.
is the same all the time.
Yeah, because I would imagine, because one of the most sensitive assumptions in here is going to be what we're building into the rate increase.
Mhm.
And the consumption is sort of what it is. You're going to look at historical and add in whatever adjustments to that. So I think that would be helpful for this. But I love, this is good, showing the coverage ratio. And if I look at the bottom line, do I take this to mean that based on this, the WPCA can, because all of the future, okay.
That's great.
Yeah, because one of the, and by the way, so this is part of what we should,
With our disclaimer.
yeah, it's a disclaimer, but one of the things that we did talk about, just conceptually, is the amount of debt. And this is obviously going to be management's recommendation, but conceptually we said, we can carry as much debt in here as we can afford to carry. And it may just be that we can't afford to do this because it'll make the fund insolvent, so the general fund will have to carry it. But the other thing we said was conceptually, there are probably some projects that, notwithstanding what the WPCA can afford, should be funded or partially funded by the town. And the plant itself was one of those things that we talked
Yeah.
about. So as you guys go through that process, that may be a consideration that, whether it's 50-50. I know that we also have questions out there about potential grant sources of, grants and things that aren't fully baked in.
Or some of the
That
bigger
doesn't
ones.
factor that in,
Yeah,
but those
so-
are opportunities, yeah.
Thanks for bringing up the grants and the applicability to the plant upgrades, because the plant upgrades can definitely benefit from certain grants and loan programs. However, we're looking to make up on past time.
Yeah.
And so it's for some of these things, time is of the essence for us to continue our operations functionality as we have it today. So we're looking at progressive design build approach when it comes to contract delivery. That approach for these types of projects has not been approved by Connecticut DEEP for clean water funding. This is something that we do need to approach them on. Talk with multiple engineering firms who have used this approach in other states. One example that was shared with me today by AECom when they were down at the plant was in Massachusetts. Massachusetts actually had to pass special legislation to authorize grant funding mechanisms to allow for plant upgrades to use the progressive design build or just design build approach.
Sounds like a second email to.
Yeah. And with the source.
But we haven't engaged deep yet, to be
So
honest.
with the source of this grant funding, we're talking state and not federal?
So I'm looking at the state, the clean water fund.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that would be a grant, not, because they also have the low interest loans, right?
Yeah.
And do their low interest loans apply to the different project? We could, got the terminology. The design, progressive, what do you spell it?
Design.
Progressive
Bill.
design.
Again, this is something that we haven't engaged with the state
Okay.
on at all. We need to, if we think that we want to utilize the funding. Can WPCA assimilate the cost? We can, but I would think we would want to
Oh, yeah.
save money where
Oh,
we
yeah.
can, and we want to move forward with, with seeking funding.
Especially being a coastal community with the resilience, I mean, there's always like, a lot of times the grants have an angle and we are, okay.
So can I ask a question on this, the calculations here? When we, in the back of the packet, I believe, you have the actual. And, it looks like the actual expenses for 24, the other expenses is 4.7 million. And in the budget, it's down to 1.8 million. What would drive that?
Which page are, which
So I'm looking
title
at
of the page?
Page. The page of
Debt service coverage?
Yep.
Yeah.
In the back of the, you have the actual historic data, you have a chart with historical data. If you go in the past,
I see it. Yeah.
So you pull that out, second page, you have debt service coverage calculation, historical data. And you see in the second column there, it says actual fiscal year 2024. And you see that, 8.6 million versus 9.5. The miscellaneous revenues went from 2 million to 2.2 million. You see where I am, Frank?
I do.
And then you see that the operations and maintenance goes from 4.9 to 5.6. I mean, all somewhat reasonable. And then you see a huge swing in other expenses. And it's going from 4.7 million all the way down to 1.8. Doesn't make sense. You want to show her where we're at?
So this is the debt service coverage
Yep.
prospectively.
Right, so
This is the same page, but it's historical.
right here.
She's
So look at this here.
fiscal year actual.
Why didn't it go down?
This is the, that following.
I think we'll put together
Look at that.
I think if we should try to,
So,
got microphones, we should try to do one person at a time, otherwise it doesn't come through on the audio.
and I would just say, I don't know the finance on that, but I would know one big thing that she has done is not just work on the cleanup of the waterfall, but the operating budget itself and how things are classified was a major item that came up. Projects and how things were being
And
built.
so I think what
Project
the
or
this
not.
question is the more detailed sheet that was
Yes.
pulled from Eunice, which we did not print as part of this packet.
The only problem I foresee though, is if that number, the other numbers, so if you're talking just classification, I don't really understand, because the rest of the numbers are sticking. The story kind of sticks. And this number is grossly off, and if it is off to the magnitude it appears, it's gonna skew every number on this page.
But the one thing that I note though is, yeah, on the projection page, which is the top page, we're about 1.8 million kind of ish across all the way across, right? 1.8 to 1.9 over time. You're right, fiscal year 24 actual is 4.7, but the prior years were back down to that $2 million range. So I don't think it's as big an issue. I still think there's potentially a
Yeah.
geography issue, like classification line item stuff. But I think it's probably more an anomaly than it is a.
Can I make a suggestion then? So since we don't have all the data, when this comes back to the Board of Finance, and I have a couple of comments here already, can we just, I don't think we need all the detailed munis sheets, but maybe Sabrina can add footnotes to this historical data page to kind of analytically explain the variations so that everybody can have some confidence as to if, we've got significantly fluctuating numbers, why those are.
And, I mean, there's one, 5 years back, I don't know if there's something that comes up every 5 years or something, but it just seems like a significant swing, but you definitely want to look at it, because if it's wrong, there's
Yep.
gonna change
Yeah.
everything.
Okay. Excellent, okay.
Oh, yeah, no, good question. I did hear a good question. I know she's been, and we'll make sure that we're not missing something yet. That's a really good question.
And
One of the
that-
things
yeah,
is
that
is
I just went
classification
through
of the
the-
expenses stuff, because that was something that we caught. I went to go approve something and I went, and I thought, and he goes, I think they're billing it to the wrong, that doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, something's not right here that I'm seeing. So I usually defer to them because there's just so many things moving through. And then Sabrina comes in and started, and next, I think it spun out and then it became a deep dive and, literally Sabrina like very heavily going through the current year and making sure things are being proper accounts and classified correctly. So there will be
Sensing the
many
big
changes
cleanup
through
on
it.
the-
But you're right, I'm not quite getting it, and without her here.
It could be a very good response, and
Yeah.
it might be like a big hit from the thing that you're fixing that
Yeah.
stinks. I have no idea. It's
How's
just
that
a huge
backup?
skew where you want
Yeah,
to
it
explain
makes
or
sense.
understand. the
Yeah,
variance.
and I think you're right, better footnoting.
Yeah,
I mean,
quick footnotes with analytical comments, and then also it sounds like, again, just kind of from an internal control standpoint, who's ever coding those things might need some training or.
Well, and I think one of the things, and I think, also from the controls on the approval side, in that role, and then is sort of my current, but then time in the role, we've spoken a lot about, this, we're gonna continue to speak about it, but making sure through the approvals process and the flow of these, that these things get the visibility and the scrutiny that they need. I argued during my sort of, particularly the second half or latter portion of my tenure, when I started receiving everything that the budget director was getting before, the volume of things being rejected, and people, were shocked to have things rejected, and I'm shocked that they were through before. So, but with that, some people viewed, well, I was making sure that the codes were correct and that was it, and somebody else was going to pick up the next piece of it. My argument has been, we all have an obligation at every turn to make sure that all of these things, and all of these phases are correct before we put our stamp on it, not to just assume the next person's going to kick it back. Attachment wasn't there, right? So, and that's what we thought it is. So I think we're gonna.
Yeah, no, the checklist to approve something should have some mechanism to make sure you're checking the code, and obviously. It's rejecting half of the stuff in rework is not.
Volume and symbols. So,
Okay,
yeah.
great. All right. So, okay. And I know we asked for this to be broken out next time, but what are the rate assumptions that are built into the user fees, the rate increase? Oh, what part of the 10% is rate?
Isn't that the 3.4?
So my name's,
Or is that the percentage?
Well, there's one meeting that talks about 2025 at 2.86.
And I mean in perpetuity. Where is that here somewhere?
so this is this year, this last year, the sewer rate went up.
I mean, if we have consumption that's increases that are relatively high, and we've only put in a 10% growth assumption on user fees, that might imply that we have a pretty modest rate increase built in, but, so what I was afraid of was that, we were gonna need 10% rate increases,
Or more.
yeah.
The commission is very sensitive to that
Yeah.
pressure as well.
That's
And,
good.
yeah, and so I think what we're looking at is a potential 20-something% increase the next year. And we haven't gone that big a leap since 2024. We had 8.25 from 2023 to 2024, but we had nothing in 2023. We've had the double-digit increases in the more distant past. The last time was 2018 at 14%. But
Well, one of the things that'll be good about this plan, honestly, is when you build out those assumptions, it's not great to have double-digit tax increases one year and 2% the next year. And building this out on a 10-year basis, I think will allow the commission to smooth it out better and to have consistency in what those look like.
And so other WPCAs on an annual basis hire a third party to perform a cost of services study to inform their rates. And that's something that I definitely would recommend, and it will be recommended to our WPCA to consider. I've talked with our chair. He's familiar with those studies just from his professional experiences in the area. And he is for it as well, just for no other reason, just a benchmark. It's something we could do now. We've never done it before. We could choose to do it every 5 years. We could choose to do it once every 10 years. So Sabrina and David and I met with Greater New Haven WPCA. Granted, they're regionalized, but this is written right into their ordinance that they do this on an annual basis.
Wow.
Yeah.
And cost of service, does that include debt service?
It's a full review, and so what you see here, so the revenue requirement, the rate and debt service coverage requirements, Sabrina actually modeled this off of Greater New Haven's
Wow, okay.
work and the cost of service.
I know this is your asset base and operating.
Yeah, and so right now, there's definitely areas that we could improve upon. So we don't have any additional surcharges based on strength of wastewater. We probably should. We just have the flat rate for everybody. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that breakout would be helpful, because, then you could see too, I mean, is that and I'm not saying, I mean, the commission obviously has discretion, as we do with the mill rate, to set those rates, but, since they'll have input to this, getting comfort on what those with those rate increases look like. I mean, obviously that can flex based on consumption and other things, although consumption, yes, I don't know how that correlates to your expense line items, but okay. Good. Any other highlights on this? I mean, since we didn't get this in advance, I'd like to study it a little more. I have a couple of, just to summarize our thoughts for maybe inclusion in the commission's version. So make a note about the fund balance transfer, but
Yes.
so we should move the 13 million out of the debt service. The management team should, and the commission should make a determination about what makes sense for the plant funding. And if there is anything else that conceptually should, from a policy perspective, be on the town side, because, when we came up with our objectives for this committee, we were like, we want to evaluate management's recommendation, like we're not, necessarily here to make it up. We think that we talked about in our first meeting, we think it's wise to develop a policy based on project type. And that policy ultimately should have the support of the commission. You would recommend it on up. And that will drive the amount of debt service that gets subtracted out of this plan. And so that'll drive a lot of other things. It may change what you want to use for rate assumptions or whatever. So things like that, the plant funding. The only other thing I had was to add commentary on the historical analysis and make sure that we're comfortable with those numbers. And I would also say whatever we need to do to reconcile to Munis, just to make sure that, that we don't have any little glitches there, but, yeah, but I had not seen this format before. Like, it's interesting she modeled it off the page, but I like this with the coverage ratio. And one of the things that's also helpful here is we talked about, it would be good to highlight, and maybe it's highlighted in here and I just don't see it, what this ends up doing to the balance sheet, and specifically what happens to fund balance over time. So one of the things that we had talked about was, and when this was done, kind of back of the envelope 2 years ago, maybe, I think Joe DeBonzo did something. One of the things we said was at the time, we had a fund balance in here of, I don't know, $14 million or something. And the plan was to utilize that over time for I&I or whatever. But we said, you should set a stake in the ground that just to cover yourself for emergencies or whatever, fund balance should never deplete itself down to X. So one of the things I'd like to see is a fund balance schedule to say, to what extent does this, we have bond funding here, but to what extent are we using fund balance for capital projects or not at all? We're going to use more fund balance for, I know some part of I&I is always going to be in the operational budget. What are we doing with fund balance? What does that translate out into over a 10-year period? And make sure that keeps some level of fund balance static. So we obviously don't want fund balance to be zero. There should be some policy as to what it is. So in the general fund, we say we don't want fund balance to be less than 10% of annual expenditures or whatever. But I think you should plan that out and show the balance sheet impact so that you're maintaining some kind of fund balance, so that if you ever have another like digester situation or something that requires.
Now we have.
We know you have, yes.
Yep.
Do you have any other?
Oh, this is great. Thank you for taking us through this.
Excellent. Right, look at that. Look at the timing. You wanted to get.
I'm watching it closely.
You want to watch football?
Of course.
Okay. Who wants to win?
I'm a Penn State. So.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, I've not, but my son is. I paid a lot of money to Penn State, so.
Yeah, that's Michigan.
Return on- Yeah, return on investment.
Well, I don't blame you because
We can have the
now
Michigan.
a very huge Alabama fan.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like I am.
But I just want to say, first of all, Michelle, it is so wonderful to have you on board. Thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for being willing to present this.
Yeah.
I know that it was draft and there was a level of discomfort, but I really think it was valuable to us. So thank you. And we do have, our next committee meeting is scheduled before the full Board of Finance meeting. So if we're going to meet our objectives for this committee, one of the things we said we would do is make a policy recommendation on where funding comes from. And so if we're going to do that, we'd like to get it from you. So that's a month away. And if you're able to do that, we can meet after the Board of Finance meeting as well. But since those assumptions will be incorporated into the plan, it makes sense that we have a policy.
You're talking about the split between.
This split.
family.
So we say this character project is split, and
Yeah.
that's going to be our
Yeah.
policy, because then once we do that, I think Craig, you suggested that that policy should be formalized into an MOU. So now we have an MOU every time debt is assigned to the WPCA, because it's really the town's debt, but they agree to pay the debt service.
Mhm.
But to the extent we have a policy that comes up with a debt sharing schedule, we can do an MOU later, but I would love to have that on our next agenda, focus on, it'll be an hour and a half before the Board of Finance meeting, but, we'll get a final look at it. We can maybe vote on the policy for recommendation, and then all three of those policies that we voted on, we can present to the Board of Finance for consideration at the meeting.
We can talk about it within the administration and then go to the WPCA next meeting and have kind of a first discussion about it, and then we can work through.
That's the topic on
Yeah.
Wednesday. Their next meeting is Wednesday. It's a full agenda and we actually have time bond for a good portion of the meeting.
So it's this sort of thing that may turn into.
What keys?
I have, nope, I got them. Yes. Thank you for checking.
All right, I think,
So. Lock it up.
I'm the last one out of that. I've been. Have all had various.
should we adjourn
Lock
and then?
on things.
Yes.
Okay,
So-
all right. Can I just, we clean up, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the time.